Hey everybody, Dr. Dan here. Welcome back. I hope you guys had a great spring break. So this week we're getting back into it, and we're running a little ahead, but we're going to get into chapter 6. And what I want you to do is to read up to around page. Why don't you read to page 140 in chapter 6? So let me glance at my book really quick. So there's a part where it says revival of trade. You can stop there. So it's a long chapter, and it's about the rise of Europe, and it's pretty fascinating because I think when you think about Western civilization, a lot of the stuff that we've studied up to this point, we can kind of relate to in our lives today. Because for me, when I study history or Western Civ, I have to be able to relate it to today, or it gets pretty boring. So, this idea of language and this idea of monotheism and Christianity. That's what we studied last time. And then before that, when we studied Rome, we learned a lot about what our government eventually became based on. And when we studied Greek culture, we studied rationalism. And so now we're getting into chapter 6, which is, the really early beginnings of Europe. And I think for a lot of us, we're going to be able to relate to this because we're getting into this chapter, and you're going to start to recognize the formation of Germanic tribes, for example, or the Frankish Empire, and so, or the Norman conquest in England, and a lot of us have roots in Europe. Second, third, fourth generation. I know that I'm Hungarian, so I come from the Magyars. If you look back that far, so it gives us something we can start to relate to, which is pretty cool. It makes it a little bit more interesting. So there's that part. But so this chapter is called "The Rise of Europe," and so, Rome falls beginning around 300 AD, and that's a process that took a lot of time, and we already read about that. And then we read about Christianity and how Christianity spread. And some of the most important things to take out of this chapter, chapter 6, is as Rome falls in the West. So, the center of Rome itself, Italy today, falls, but in the east, Constantinople, which is Istanbul in Turkey today, is the Eastern Roman Empire, and that stays intact. And so this idea of the Greek Orthodox Church or the Byzantines, that's where that all starts. So understand that at the time, way back when, Rome was the center of Western Latin culture, and Constantinople was Eastern, and it had more Greek influence. So Constantinople, hung in there and stayed strong after Rome fell in Italy. So understand that Eastern Roman Empire lives on, and it stays very strong, mainly because it was more naturally protected from warriors, and it was more urban, and it was more organized. And there's a lot of other reasons, but those were the main reasons. As you recall, Rome in the West, was attacked by a lot of different tribes and the Visigoths, and so that kind of got to be a mess where Constantinople remained. The other thing that's important to understand, so we have Constantinople, still in place, and the other really important thing to understand is read about Islam, the beginning of Islam, the beginning of the Muslim movement. And it's a cool thing to read if you're not familiar with it, because it's monotheistic. Muhammad is the prophet who founded Islam, and there's a lot of similarities as far as the Hebrews and Christianity and Islam in the monotheism instead of the Bible. There's the Quran, in Islam. So read about that. That comes around page 127, 128, something like that. And it's interesting because Islamic culture is blending so much with Western culture right now, in all ways. In some ways not so great, but in some ways, like here in the U.S., it's fine. And so it's an important it's an important part for us to read and to learn about. And I'd like you to kind of get into that and learn about it, and maybe we'll do a little assignment that has something to do with Islam. So the other stuff to read is, and I'm just kind of looking through my notes, this whole era, so between like 500 and 1000 AD in there, used to be referred to as the Dark Ages. Your book calls it the Middle Ages, so there's the High Middle Ages. And really the Dark Ages, because historians originally thought about this time between 500 and 1000, where really nothing much went on as far as technological development, cultural development, and there's some basis for that in Europe. A lot of tribal warfare, a lot of movement in staking out claims. So there's the Carolingian Empire, which is basically France. There is a lot of changes going on in Spain and in Gaul, which is Spain, Portugal, that area. So there's just a lot of stuff going on. The other thing you'll read about is something called feudalism. And feudalism is this idea where there is a lack of a strong central government. The way society was set up throughout Europe was that lords, or for our usage, like really rich guys with a lot of land, would own an estate, and then serfs or peasants, like us, the worker bees, would live on those estates and grow food for the lords, and in exchange for that, they would have a place to live, a house or a village or what have you. So you're going to read about feudalism, which, the reason that thrives is because there's not a strong central government or any organized systems during this time. And then you're also going to learn about vassals. So you'll learn about fiefdoms, and vassals are basically warriors who work for the lords, fight for the lords, and then they get a fief or a fiefdom, where a piece of land they own, where there may be peasants on that land too. I'm going on and on. It's confusing. Anyway, it's probably not the most exciting chapter we're reading, so we're going to read up to page 140, and then we'll do the other half probably next week. But what I really want you to get out of it is I want you to pay attention to this idea that modern Europe is starting in a real nascent way, starting to form, and I want you to read about Islam because it's important. And so do that. Now next week, what I plan on doing is we're going to get off the textbook, and I'm going to provide you a reading about technology in the Middle Ages, because I'm really into the history of technology and it's kind of fun. So I hope to have a photocopy of a chapter from another book for you to read about technology in the Middle Ages, and we'll read about all sorts of different stuff. But what I'm really fascinated with is the influence of Asia into Western civilization. Now again, this is Western Civ, so we don't study the East at all, we don't study Asia at all, but I'm going to kind of break the rules here because I want you to understand that a lot of technology and a lot of stuff came from Asia even back then in 500 AD and onward. So that's it for this lecture. I hope you guys had a great break. Welcome back, and we'll get right back into it again. If you have any questions, let me know. Thanks. Bye-bye.